Sabe que esta terra faz de si montes delgados e jaz no sertão norte e sul. E toda esta serra é grossa e no cabo dela se faz 4 ou 5 montes pequenos. Foi assim que João de Lisboa, em 1514, descrevia o Cabo da Boa Esperança, 26 anos depois de Dias o ter dobrado.
There is, of course, absolutely no contemporary record at all, unfortunately, of the voyage of Dias. No log, no chart drawn by Dias has survived. The only record of any detail at all is that contained in Barros's chronicle. And Barros, you may remember, reckoned that when Dias had reached a certain point, which he called the Serradish Range, which I reckon was just south of the Orange River, there he was held up by the weather for 5 days. Then Barros said he headed seawards, and then was driven by the weather for 13 days. Now, obviously, poor Dias was held up by the prevailing southerly wind. He couldn't make progress against a headwind. And we have recently the advantage of being able to study wind directions and wind strengths produced by the South African sailing directions. And we have the exact figures for the mouth of the Orange River. And we know that in the month of January, on an average, the wind blows from the north for 1% only of the time.
So statistically it would have been
impossible. Absolutely fantastic. And yet that nonsense is repeated over and over again in school textbooks, that Dias was driven by a northerly gale for 13 days.
Eric Axelson, 73 anos, professor doutor pela Universidade de Witwatersrand, é filho de marinheiros, é de origem sueca. Tornou-se pelos seus trabalhos de investigação, ao longo de mais de 50 anos, numa das grandes autoridades mundiais nas navegações dos portugueses em África. Foi vice-reitor da Universidade do Cabo, é doutor honoris causa pela Universidade do Natal, é comendador da Ordem do Infante e membro honorário da Academia de Marinha. Mas talvez o maior significado da sua obra seja o conhecimento profundo por um estrangeiro da nossa história. Ele fala com uma familiaridade que, para nós portugueses, é invejável dos cronistas, de João de Barros, pela sua imaginação o induziu tanta vez em erro, da exatidão de João de Lisboa e da riqueza descritiva da obra de Pacheco Pereira. A instituição académica, que nem sempre é pródiga em honrar os seus grandes, dedica, na Universidade de Witwatersrand, na biblioteca principal, uma exposição permanente ao trabalho de Axelson. Em 1938, Eric Axelson descobriu o padrão que Bartolomeu Dias deixou mais ao norte na sua viagem pela costa oriental da África. Embora esta descoberta talvez tenha sido a parte mais espetacular da sua obra, Axelson é também conhecido pelas inúmeras publicações a que hoje enriquecem a história de Portugal e que são texto obrigatório em cursos de história por todo o mundo. Foi também Eric Axelson quem descobriu a localização correta do último padrão deixado por Diogo Cão em Ludritz, no que é hoje a costa da Namíbia. Desse padrão só existe esta réplica no Museu da Cidade do Cabo. O original foi levado pelos colonizadores alemães para Berlim no princípio do século e, ao que se sabe, foi destruído durante a Segunda Grande Guerra. Mas é no conhecimento da viagem de Dias que Axelson é uma autoridade incontestável.
He left the coast, perhaps having tacked furiously backwards and forwards for 5 days, and he would have directed himself perhaps down to the south-southwest. And after 13 days, making perhaps 2.5 knots, he would have found himself in latitude 38.5 or 39 degrees south. And there he would have found, again, thanks to marvellous figures given in the South African sailing directions, he would have found westerly winds, which would have helped him. Now, not having found any indication of land, he changed direction to the east, according to Barros. And for some days, he sailed east. Well, he would have had a stern wind. Sometimes it would have been almost too strong a stern wind. He would have had to have shortened sail, and that, I think, is where the suggestion of a storm comes in. And Barrow said also he encountered a cold sea. We're down there, close to the roaring forces.
It's extremely cold already.
Extremely cold. In fact, it's not marked on this chart, but an older chart marks icebergs up as far as about 38 degrees.
So that was virtually
in days gone by.
The latitude where he was.
He had reached the latitude where icebergs have been seen to come up. And after 6 days, I reckon that he could have reached this particular longitude, he would have found a westerly wind, a strong westerly wind, sometimes reaching gale force.
Is it frequent for the wind to turn around in this
Well,
region
it's
here?
natural. At this time of the year, in January, winds from the west prevail. Winds from the northwest and west and southwest are the prevalent winds in January. Once you get down south of about latitude 36. And he would have found then a favourable wind, except sometimes it would have been too favourable, and he would have had to have reefed a sail. But if he had averaged, I reckon, 4.5 knots, after 6 days, he would have found himself at a longitude. He, of course, didn't know the meaning of the word longitude, as yet he had no means of calculating longitude, but it would have happened to have been almost due south of where Mossel Bay is today. Then, according to Barros, he steered north. And, of course, once he got over the edge of the Gullis Bank, he would have been in the Gullis Current, and he would have been carried down to the west. And he would easily have seen land where Barros said he saw it in the early maps, at a place where there were cattle, where there were herdsmen on the shore. And so the early maps, the Martellus map, for instance, drawn in about 1489, the Cantino map, drawn in 1502, marks a cape there as a Cape Vaca.
O Cabo da Vaca, como lhe chamou Bartolomeu Dias, o primeiro ponto da África Oriental visto por europeus. Hoje chama-se Cabo do Canhão. O porquê desta alteração de nome não está claro. Bartolomeu Dias começa aqui, a brodejar, perto da costa, à procura de um porto de abrigo que viria a surgir mais ao norte. Identificamo-lo pela carta moderna que Exelson associa às descrições de João de Lisboa. Para norte, um cabo que se adelga com recortes nas falésias, dunas de uma cor avermelhada, mas que mudam de cor rapidamente, com o pôr do sol em África. É historicamente irrefutável que a última fase da viagem de Bartolomeu Dias começa aqui. De resto, a descrição de João de Lisboa desta parte da costa assenta com notável exatidão com aquilo que nós vemos.